Good morning. Welcome in here to a snowy Omaha, Nebraska. I'm Ravi, Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me.
With back pain.
Shane Schillerberg producing. Did you get out and shovel this morning?
I did.
Oh, man.
And, dude, the snow, the wet stuff underneath the light stuff
So heavy.
was so unexpected.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I wasn't watching the snowfall last night. I was watching the national championship game. I know, big surprise to everybody out there. But as I'm scooping up snow this morning, and my driveway's not small, and it's on a little bit of an incline. Well, I guess decline. Because I'm going
There's
down
a slope
the hill.
of one way or another.
And, I found myself scooping up all that heavy stuff and just thinking, what am I doing? Like, why haven't I invested into what are those, like, snow machines?
Oh,
snow
blower.
Yeah. And, like, why haven't I invested into one of those yet? And it's because I'm cheap and don't want to.
They're called kids.
What's that?
They're called kids.
Those are the $10,000 ones.
I was like, those. It's not worth. Those are the most expensive snow removal service you can buy as children. I'm just waiting for my guy. He'll come by. He'll Kendall, right? Yeah. Kendall's my guy. He comes by and does the snow. So he'll
Just because out of the kindness of his heart?
No, I mean I'd pay him for it. But it's
like, if that's so, Kendall, you know where I live.
It's the kindness of my low back that I need help with there. So appreciate that. He'll be out any minute, I'm sure. But it's a nice snowy Tuesday. Is it Tuesday?
It is Tuesday.
Nice snowy.
Last week threw us off a little bit, but today's Tuesday.
Yeah, eventually we'll figure out what day it is again. It's a nice snowy Tuesday morning here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha and ESPN Tri-Cities. And we officially have a national champion of college football.
No, I shouldn't do that.
We also,
but I will.
Well, we have an official champion of college football for now. We'll see.
We'll see how long that stands without a little star up in the right corner.
Yeah, like I assume the NCAA isn't actually going to do anything because that's kind of what the NCAA does, is not do anything. But it is going to be one of those that listen, however much you think it actually impacted the winning and losing of games, and in Michigan's case, just the winning of games, it's going to be really difficult to not difficult. It's impossible to tell the story of Michigan this season without all of the cloud that hung over them.
And I wouldn't say yet that the NCAA won't do anything because, I mean, they may not technically rule over the college football playoffs.
Yeah.
But don't think that the NCAA and the CFP aren't in bed together.
Oh, for sure.
And the NCAA has kind of like worked out something like this with BCS before when they stripped USC back in 2004.
You're right.
So, like, I'm actually holding on to more hope than probably most people because of that.
And I actually don't even care that much because it's not like if they strip Michigan of the title, then Washington gets it. What I was rooting for last night, I think people got this a little bit confused, which is fine, is I was rooting for Kalen DeBoer to get a national championship because I'm a huge Kalen DeBoer fan, which everybody who listens to the show is very familiar. But because I was rooting for Kalen DeBoer, that meant I was rooting against Michigan. I also I don't dislike Michigan in and of itself. Like, I don't actively, like Texas, actively dislike all the time, right? Iowa, actively dislike all the time. Wisconsin, actively dislike all the time. I sort of actually like Michigan. I really like how they play football. I sort of have a weird soft spot for Jim Harbaugh, even though he's a big weirdo because of his time with the 49ers, and that was a good period in their history.
When he talked about every piece of confetti having a story last night.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't think all the pieces of confetti.
This piece of confetti made it all the way from Tuscaloosa. This piece of confetti came from Miami.
There's definitely a weird streak to the guy that I don't always love. But I will say this. What you can't go out and say, if you're Jim Harbaugh, and I want to make sure I get the quote right here. He says, it went exactly how we wanted it to go to win every game. I believe that. I think most of their games went through the script that they wanted to, right? The off-the-field issues were innocent, and we stood strong and tall because we knew we were innocent, and I'd like to point that out. What I would like to point out is they fired someone for breaking the rules. Someone who was on their staff was fired for breaking rules.
What I would like to point out is your quarterback said in a press conference before the college football playoff semifinals that every team cheats.
Yes.
So they knew about it.
So JJ McCarthy is admitting the cheating. He's just saying everybody does it. Okay. Which is probably a more reasonable defense. Like, hey, why are you singling us out versus, oh, we didn't do anything wrong. But also, the university literally fired a person because they broke the rules and cheated. So I don't know if you know much about working for public universities and stuff like that. I know you worked at Omaha, right? It's really hard to fire someone without cause.
It's extremely difficult, really, in any job.
Yeah, it is, right? But really hard to fire someone without cause. And especially in jobs where there's a sort of public-facing component. I know he was deep on, but any job in Michigan football is a public job, I consider it, or in any major football program, right? So you're firing a guy who has become very famous recently for cheating. You can't go back and then say, we weren't cheating. You either have to stand by Connor Stallions and ride it out and be like, hey, this is our guy. He didn't do anything wrong. Or you can claim innocence. You don't get to do both, because if you have consequences for cheating, then you can't go back and say, hey, we weren't cheating.
And
nobody can do that.
Like, look, in-game sign stealing has never been illegal, ever. And that's not what's being argued here, because that's just a part of the game. That's not what Michigan is accused of doing.
No, they were video recording other teams' games.
I don't know how, like this is really not that hard to understand.
Yeah. And no one is denying, I mean, except for Jim Harbaugh, apparently, no one is denying the fact.
Michigan, the fan base. I mean, there's even some national people that are just glossing over it.
Yeah, people are glossing over it for sure. But no one really denied the facts of the case. No one denied that that's what Connor Stallions was doing. The argument you can make is, okay, how much of an impact does that have on winning? And I don't know, because Michigan's really, really good at football.
They're a great football team. They have great talent. They had guys return because they wanted to make the national championship and win.
They were built in a way, like they were built like one of the earlier Alabama teams, where really great line play, really great running backs, really great defense. JJ McCarthy's better than like a Brody Croyle, but he's probably somewhere in like an AJ McCarron range, maybe a little better. He's probably somewhere between AJ McCarron and
I'd probably sit AJ McCarron or maybe even a step down. He did not look good last night.
He didn't, but he's going to get drafted a lot higher than AJ McCarron did. So I'm trying to find
where does he get drafted though? Because before the season started, a little bit throughout the season, when you sprinkle that he was top 3 in Heisman voting, that it was like, okay, like JJ McCarthy's starting to kind of look like a first round pick. Not seeing it anymore. I'm seeing him fall more maybe in the 3rd round range.
Yeah, so there's some disagreement amongst analysts where he ends up, but even in the 3rd round, I think AJ McCarron was a 5th rounder. So maybe. Even as a 3rd rounder, he would be higher thought of by the NFL than an AJ McCarron was. I'd probably put him somewhere between like an AJ McCarron and a Mac Jones in terms of Bama quarterbacks. Right. But my point is, this is a team built in a way that I really appreciate. It's built in a way that I think a lot of Nebraska fans appreciate. You saw the way they dominated on the ground last night. And that's the thing that sort of sucks about this whole situation is it was a pretty dominating performance last night. There's definitely places that Washington could have gone out and made it even closer. I mean, I have a whole list here in my notes of just times where Michael Penix specifically did things totally out of character and missed throws that were totally out of character. Mm-hmm. And some of that has to go to Michigan's credit, right? They beat him up. You saw him walking off the field. That dude was
holding his side.
Yep. Holding his side. He had rolled his ankle or got his ankle rolled up on at one point. He had gotten hit a ton. And even though he'd only got sacked once, he got hit on almost every drop back. And so that's definitely part of him playing out of character, I think. And
well, he was rushed.
Yeah, he was rushed in a way that Texas wasn't able to do.
Mm-hmm. Even on those plays when Texas did rush his throws.
Yeah.
If if we took the time it took him to throw the ball against
Yeah.
Michigan and the time it took him to throw the ball against Texas, you would see a difference by maybe it's decimal time, but
even a half second.
Give a guy half a second, he's going to make that throw against Texas.
Yeah.
He won't make that throw against Michigan.
And he got rushed to the point where even when he did have time, he started missing some of those throws as well, which was super out of character for him over the last, honestly, over most of his career, but especially over the last 2 years at Washington. So credit to the Michigan defense there. Credit to the Michigan defense, credit to the coaching staff. And you have to appreciate how they put this team together. That's why it's so frustrating to me.
Yeah, it's still going to be tainted.
Yeah.
Everything about this season is just tainted. I know they're a good team, but when you're like talking like, hey, I'm trying to separate the fact that, hey, did the wins come because you knew certain information, or is it just because you're more talented than anybody else? The problem is there's going one side of the hand can't be true without the other side of the hand.
Yeah, you can't separate them because they
absolutely
happen.
It's going to be tainted. Yeah. And like I said before, the NCAA or the College Football Playoff Committee, if they vacate any of Michigan's wins this season, well, then you can't actually make them eligible for the College Football Playoff,
they wouldn't have been
because they wouldn't have enough.
They wouldn't be in
to back up for it.
Because Florida State
and then what? You can't win the national championship. So, it's just crazy because with if some of the wins this season are tainted, how do you move on from something like how do you allow? I'm trying to map this out in my head as I talk through this, because if one team did it, got away with it, and yes, that other teams some way do sign stealing in game, that they don't go to the extreme of Michigan, but because of the systemic and disgusting scouting and sign stealing that we saw from Michigan this season. And then also don't forget that they had an assistant coach house was raided for an FBI investigation. Yeah. They were a part of a couple of recruiting.
During the COVID seasons,
recruiting things and violations there. There's so much this season that it has me thinking, how early do you attack this? Do you attack this now? Do you wait a couple of months? But at some point it needs to be, the crime needs to be solved. We can't just sit here and say that Michigan is a poster child of the world right now, because they didn't get here the right way.
Right. And I agree with you there. I don't think anything will actually come of it in terms of punishment for the actual games played. They might have because in general, and I know they did this back with USC, but in general, you're talking about an organization that really is fairly toothless at this point, especially with college football, because of how separated they've become they run their own championship. They choose their own participants in the playoff and everything like that. It has been so far removed from the NCAA. And honestly, I think it's going to become even more removed. We heard Chip Kelly talk about football kind of becoming its own thing. We've heard a lot of people talk about, maybe you have a super Division I, a super league of Power 5 teams, and they create their own rules. I actually think it is going that direction. And if the NCAA still wants any part of the revenue, they're not going to attack one of the big dogs in what's happening there. I think the NCAA maybe does a little slap on the wrist so it looks like they did anything. But in a world in which college football is moving off in its own direction to govern itself by its own rules, I don't know how aggressive the NCAA is going to be with the things we saw this year.
At some point, you just got to do the right thing. And the right thing would be to strip this title from Michigan, because even though they had some really talented players, and even though they won that game in commanding fashion, you still didn't get here the way that you should have gotten here.
And I'm not,
and you know, so at some point you gotta throw integrity into this conversation. And the NCAA, if they want to get away from being looked at as a slimy and backless group, organization, committee, whatever you want to call them, at spineless, backless, spineless is what I meant to say. It got there. You have to. You have to rain down on Michigan in this case. You just have to.
But here,
and even if you upset the big dog,
yeah,
what is one big dog in a huge pond?
I understand that, but if you look at the history of the NCAA, integrity has not really been on the first and foremost.
No, but like I'm saying, if you want to change the narrative,
do they though? Do they?
Well, but look, they did it back in 2004. Why wouldn't they do it again?
Yeah, I mean, that's fair, but also...
And yes, it was the BCS that made the decision, but that's not to say the NCAA didn't give them the kick in the rear that they needed to make that decision.
So I think the BCS was much closer to the old version of college football than we are going into now. I think there was very little talk I think the decision came down a few years after the actual 2004 title, but you're talking about a time in which there was really no threat of college football breaking off and doing its own thing. Now I think it's all but a certainty. And in order to keep those member schools involved in all the other sports that the NCAA does have control over, you kind of have to just hands off with college football. I genuinely think that's how it's going to go because the NCAA has never done the right thing. That's what that is the NCAA at its core.
But Charlie Baker seems to kind of have a new vision for how the NCAA should be ran. It wouldn't shock me because he's already started to make statements in his first year, second year, I think it's his.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. He's an early guy.
Yeah.
We'll call it his rookie season. Who knows? He played 40 games last season, but he's still considered a rookie.
Yeah. He doesn't have enough service time to be the second.
So
still eligible for rookie of the year.
Yeah. Regardless of what it is, Charlie Baker is not afraid to stand up for what he thinks is right and the direction the NCAA should be headed. So he's the right guy in the seat for something like this to change.
At the end of the day, though, I think the NCAA is trying to survive. I think they're trying to survive in the new world of college athletics, and you don't do it by pissing off the blue bloods in college football. I agree that he said some of the right things. Until they start doing some of the right things, I have a really hard time believing that there's anything consequential is going to happen from this. And the other part of this is they've pretty consistently still gotten it wrong on things like transfer waivers and stuff where there seems to be no logical consistency whatsoever in terms of how they're approaching this. So listen, I hope you're right. I hope that they do turn over a new leaf and start to be, a more integrity-filled institution that actually does try and keep things on a level playing field, especially when it's things like this. I couldn't care less about the Reggie Bush thing. I don't care that his family got a condo and he got some cash and whatever, because that is something everybody was doing at the time and is, by the way, legal now. It's kind of how I feel about Kelvin Sampson. Like, Kelvin Sampson got blackballed from college basketball because he sent too many texts. Like 6 months later, it was no longer a violation, right? He was ahead of the curve. They banned him for text, but he had a show cause penalty over text messages.
Yeah, this will never.
That's what I'm saying.
Something.
This is a different thing. The in-person scouting, the recruiting violations during COVID,
it will never become okay.
Yeah, the recruiting violations with the computer getting raided. Like, this is a different thing to me, but I still don't know that I trust the NCAA to do the right thing, because I have never trusted the NCAA to do the right thing, because the history of watching them indicates, they're probably just going to kick the can down the road at best. They're going to roll over and show their belly at worst, right? The NCAA is the dog that barks a lot, and then as soon as you go up to them, immediate submission. There's like, oh yeah, scratch my belly, it's fine, I'm not going to do anything to you. Like, they're my dog Ravi, basically. Every time he'll bark really, really loud, rolls over every time you go up to him. Just there's my belly. Now, Doug, you got to watch out for. He's a little crazy, but Ravi is going to show you his belly. That to me is the NCAA. They've never been they've always been a spineless organization, as you said. And listen, I don't know how much more we need to talk about the NCAA, but as I mentioned, it is a key part of telling the story of Michigan football this season.
And that's something I had a problem with too, is every headline that you read is Michigan's the perfect story, X, Y, and Z. And you know what? All things aside, if you took all the scandals out of it and you just took Michigan for what they were as a football team this year, they would be a pretty cool story.
Absolutely.
It would be a pretty great story. I don't know if I'd call them perfect, but I mean, they had a perfect season, but
it's a great story without it.
You have Jim Harbaugh that, took this team from the gutter back to relevance again.
You're innocent until proven guilty.
And he was on the hot seat a few years ago.
Yeah.
Like,
you have a really strong defense that looks like they're going to be just as strong next season, even if they lose some pieces, because that's kind of what happened the year before, and they just got better this year. Blake Corum, J.J. McCarthy comes back. You have Roman Wilson on the outside. Like, all of these guys are sticking around to win a national title. Like, on paper,
it's a great story.
You look at this team and you're like, this is a team that I want to root for, but you can't forget all the other things.
Yeah, you're ignoring half the story if you do that.
You know how many potholes that car hit before it got to the national championship? You know how many tires had to be changed before they got to the national championship game?
Yeah,
they needed 4 new wheels.
Their coach was literally suspended for half the season. He was suspended for half the season, and we're just ignoring that like it didn't happen.
We're ignoring so much of this. So much of the whole story, and that's why I can't get behind everybody glossing over the fact that Michigan didn't do something that gave them an advantage.
Yeah, listen, I'm okay with obviously giving Michigan credit. They won that game convincingly last night, even during a stretch where it seemed like Washington could get back into it, and they had opportunities they weren't able to take advantage of. They won. They were dominant at the start. They dominated at the very end to give themselves a nice, comfortable margin. We should be talking about that this morning. That should be the story of, man, they did this in an old school way and sprinkled in a little bit of flair that has made them a modern Big Ten team, right? That's what we should be talking about. Instead, what we're talking about is Connor Stallions and Jim Harbaugh's suspension and recruiting violations and things like that, because that's a huge part of who Michigan was this season. Coming up next, we will set up the show, let you know who's going to be joining us. We will talk some Michigan football with one of their writers. We're also going to talk to Damon Benning. He rescheduled for today, so we'll talk to him as well as our guy Mike Schaefer at 9 o'clock. Plenty of more to come on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. As very many innocent people do, they fired the alleged perpetrator. That was a very innocent move that people do.
And the problem is right now they technically are innocent.
Oh, they're not innocent. They're under investigation.
Right, but they're not proven guilty yet.
Yeah, but this also isn't a court of law.
Sure, but like if we are going to look at it from that stance, like innocent until proven guilty, like I guess you can make that claim, but it just makes me laugh.
I mean,
because all the information's in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, he can claim whatever he wants, right? But this is a thing that I actually get super frustrated about, because people do this with like the First Amendment and free speech and stuff too. It's like, yes, you are innocent until proven guilty if you were being charged of a crime. You're not being charged of a crime. You're being called a cheater by a private organization. No one's going to prison here. I mean, maybe
that's what you think.
I mean, maybe the guy that got raided by the FBI, but Jim Harbaugh's not on trial here. He's not going to prison. I don't have to give you the benefit of the doubt when I see all of this evidence in front of me, including you firing your own guy, your quarterback saying that everybody cheats. I don't have to give you the presumption of innocence because I'm not a judge.
We knew we were innocent.
I feel like I need to listen to Carrie Underwood's song before he cheats right now. So, because maybe if I would have heard that song before the season started, I would have been able to attack Michigan the way I wanted to attack.
I mean, Michigan should have listened to that song about 3 years ago before they started cheating with Connor Stallions. That would have been the help for them.
So is it safe to assume that you can just break the rules and it doesn't really matter? Because it's going to take so long for them to investigate that you're probably going to end up leaving before it even gets done. I mean, and we've
in
seen
terms
this
of Jim Harbaugh.
in terms of in breaking rules in the NCAA. I mean, because we've seen this so many times. We've seen this at USC. I mean, it's out there. I mean, I don't know.
The problem is USC didn't get away with it.
Right, but Pete Carroll did. That's the thing.
Well, because he left early.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's why I said,
Yeah.
is it a Jim Harbaugh thing? Because he could leave and then just be fine.
And here's the other thing. Here's the other problem when it comes to like even stripping titles or whatever, or they do this with Final Fours more than they do it with football because they actually control the NCAA basketball championship, right? Is where they'll vacate Final Fours and stuff like that. They've done it with UMass. It happens to John Calipari pretty much everywhere he goes. But the problem with it is it's like I still saw it happen. Like you can't erase the memory of that thing happening, right? So I'm never going to erase the memory of Michigan putting it on Washington last night.
We knew we were innocent.
I'm never going to erase the memory of the Patriots winning all those Super Bowls. I'm never going to erase the memory of, John Calipari making it to the Final Four with UMass and Marcus Camby. Like you can take the banners down. You can say whatever you want. You can put the asterisk next to whatever. But once you've that's why it's worth it. Because once it's in people's minds, they're like, oh, okay, got vacated, whatever. Like Nick Saban has wins vacated at Alabama, and nobody talks about it. There's a season in there. He's technically 2-6 or something because his first year at Alabama, they ended up getting sanctioned for who knows what. And no one cares. No one remembers. No one talks about it.
Did they win the title that year?
Not that year, they didn't. But again, I think Bobby Bowden had wins vacated at one point. Nobody talks about that. Because they saw what happened on the field at a certain point. Like, yeah, you can go back and academically change whatever you want for the sake of the record book. But once people see what happens, it really doesn't change how people think about a season unless it's something like this is not to me, even though I think it's a thing that deserves to be punished. It hasn't risen to the degree of like something incredibly egregious. I mean, like breaking criminal laws would have to happen for people. Like if Jim Harbaugh ended up in prison for some reason, like not that he's done anything that deserves to go in prison. This is an example. If he were to end up in prison for some reason and they like arrested him on the field as he's trying to receive a trophy, like that would stick in people's heads in a way where you're like, oh yeah, maybe that is tainted a little bit. But when it's, hey, 3 years from now, the NCAA, if it still exists, is going to be like, hey, yeah, we have to strip that 2024, 2023 national title. People are going to be like, okay, whatever. I saw it happen. It's fine.
Yep.
That's the problem with it.
Yep. It'll be a 3 to 5 year thing.
It's going to take forever because it always does. And by then,
They'll strip the title.
People
will think about the season. Now, okay.
Like when I go back to 2004, I'm not like, title vacated. I go, USC won that title. 2003, they split it with Oklahoma. Or they split it with LSU. Like I don't go back and say, yeah, well, that's a vacated national title. Nobody won the title that year.
But you do remember it.
It's like Gretna.
But you do remember it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I remember USC as champions.
Yeah, you can say they're champions, but then what's the next thing you remember? Oh, yeah, that one got vacated.
Honestly, until you brought up USC this morning, I did forget that they got vacated.
And don't forget.
But when you think about vacated teams then, because like you're not really thinking about other vacated teams when you're thinking about the team that should get something vacated. But when I bring up an example, what did it just make you do? Like it made you stoop to the high school level just there.
Yeah, I mean,
those are things that you just remember though. Even if you went down a title list, you'd be like, okay. Ooh, but that one, like, I may have skipped over USC and gone 2 more years, but I'm going to go back to USC for a moment because didn't that one get vacated?
Yeah, and
like you'll remember those details.
And I still don't care that it got vacated. That's the problem.
But it's because it didn't direct your fandom and like it directly impact your fandom. And if it impacted your fandom, you would never live it down. Ever.
Sure.
Let it live you down.
If a Nebraska title got vacated for some reason.
You'd be so mad.
Yeah, you'd be furious about it. Or if
then you would say, no, this is not a vacated title.
Or
this is mine.
If Iowa, for some reason, won a national title and then got it vacated,
you would remember it till the day you die.
Never let Iowa fans forget about that.
You would remember it till the day you die.
But at the same time, that's why like acknowledging your biases is important, because I can acknowledge, hey, if this happened to Nebraska or a team I don't like if it happened to a team I do like,
if it happened to Texas this year, say Texas.
Yeah, had Texas won and then they got it vacated, I'd be like, sorry, Texas, doesn't count, buddy. Like, I'm not going to do that with Michigan because I don't care that much. But and so that's what I mean. From the general public, if you're an unbiased position, you're not going to go back and say, 2024 or 2023, there was no national title technically. In 2004, there was no national title. Like I don't go back a few years and be like, oh, there was no Class A state football champion a few years. It's like I saw them win the title. I saw Zane Flores beat Westside. I saw it happen. It happened. I don't care what the kid's address was. I don't. Like I don't, right? And so it's the same thing here. Like I do care about what happened, but 5 years from now, when the NCAA finally does something, I'm not going to skip over Michigan.
Would you forgive all sins
I
if
don't
you
know
could
about all
read
sins.
Connor
By the way, don't-
Stalions' manifesto?
Don't forget though, when the
That's
when the sanctions do actually come down, like in 5 years or whatever, it's the players at that time that are probably going to suffer from it.
I'm not even talking about like they don't even have to do bowl bans or whatever. They can,
You know, if it's a
if
bowl
we're
ban
just
or
talking
something.
about going back and saying, hey, this title gets vacated, and Jim Harbaugh, who's coaching the Chargers now, is, you know, he's got a show cause penalty, so he can't come back to the NCAA. Like whatever, even if they don't do it, so it punishes the players in 3 to 5 years, which it seems like they've tried to be better about. But it doesn't matter. Like at that point, it doesn't matter anymore. And so that's the part that's frustrating is even if that, and that's why it makes the cheating worth it. Because like once you get it on people in front of people's faces that you beat Washington the way you did last night, that's all. That's what they're going to remember at the end of the day.
And you know, I don't even think it was as commanding as people
Not as the
like,
score
made
indicated.
it seem at the end of the game.
Yeah.
Because if you really think about it, that game was separated by 7 points for the majority.
Yeah, for
of
like
it.
60% of the game.
Yeah, for the majority of that game, it was separated by 7 points. Yes, Michigan held the lead all the way through,
Mhm.
but it was still separated by that score. Now,
Well, it's the things that stick in your mind, right? Michigan punched them in the face early. They rode it out for the middle of the game, and then they closed hard.
and that's what I was going to say. Now, it did seem like Michigan dominated from the start.
Yeah.
But then it always makes me laugh when OCs get cute and get cocky and then just like abandon what's been working the entirety of like the first portion of the game. And that's exactly what Michigan did. The run, Washington couldn't stop it. It's not like you were providing these crazy looks. No, Washington just kind of looked physically not there early on.
Yeah, it looked like Michigan was dominating their line.
And 2, the holes were so big that you could, you know, drive a semi truck through them.
You could drive one of these snowplows through them.
And dude, Edwards had the easiest 2 46-yard touchdown runs of his life.
One cut and go.
But then they just go straight to the pass. Let Washington come all the way back.
Yep.
Made the game a little bit interesting. And then when did you see them pull away? When they went back to the run.
And they almost did it on accident, right? Because it started on the J.J. McCarthy scramble. And they're like, oh, yeah, we can run. And then they immediately called QB run, and it was off to the races from there with Corum kind of finishing off that game for him. Coming up at 8, we're going to talk to our guy, Damon Benning. We will continue more with Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next. Wrapping up hour number 1 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Real quick, set up the show for you. I mentioned that we're going to talk to Damon Benning at 8 a.m. We'll go over probably a lot of things, but we'll specifically get into the national championship game with him. At 8:45, we're going to talk to Anthony Broome from the Wolverine. That's part of the On3 network to discuss Michigan's national championship. At 9, we will talk to Mike J. Schaefer from Husker 24/7. And at 9:30, we'll talk to Mike Carmin, who covers Purdue basketball for goldenblack.com. And Nebraska has a huge game tonight at home against Purdue. See if they can bounce back from their disappointing performance on the road.
Hopefully this weather doesn't steer people away from that game.
Yeah, I would think not. I'm from what I've seen on the forecast, from what I've seen, I mean from what my mom's told me about the forecast, the weather is supposed to.
Chief meteorologist,
Rose
Lulla,
the chief meteorologist of my family. No, from what I understand, the wind and stuff is supposed to die down around noon, so they should hopefully have plenty of time to clear the roads before the game tonight. Assuming Purdue got into town okay. If they were smart, they probably came in last night. Or maybe Monday morning.
They would have been here yesterday
because I know Chicago
at latest.
Yeah, I know that like Creighton flew out yesterday morning into Chicago to avoid the worst of it, and they got in town safely. So I would assume Purdue did something similar, kind of coming the other direction from the same part of the country. But yeah, so that'll be tonight. Creighton plays DePaul tonight as well. So that'll be a couple interesting matchups in the local college basketball scene. But as we get into some of the other things we want to talk about today, I did want to get some final touches on that national championship game because, you heard it in the clip there from Michael Penix that there were opportunities on the field for Washington. And again, for all the stuff we talked about Michigan, they outplayed Washington. Like, I'm not taking that away from them. I was talking about a lot of the holding penalties on Twitter last night, which is, I think, a fair criticism of how the game went. I thought that there was not a consistency in the way holding was called on Michigan versus the way it was called on Washington, or was not called on Michigan versus the way it was called on Washington. But again, I'm not saying that's why Michigan won. I'm not saying that's why Washington lost. Penix brought up a good point because I wrote down several instances of opportunities as I'm watching that game where Washington had a chance to get or stay in that game kind of throughout until the very end when it became a 2-touchdown, then a 3-touchdown lead that they really did not take advantage of. The first one that pops to mind, they go for it on 4th down around midfield. Penix has a wide open Odunze, throws it to the wrong shoulder, or maybe Odunze doesn't get turned. I don't know if it was a bad throw or that Odunze didn't get.
Because I know what Penix was doing
Yes.
there. He was keeping the ball away from the safety in the middle of the field.
Throwing it to the outside shoulder, which is
I don't like the way Odunze turned.
I don't either.
Because like we teach in baseball, at some point you have to just swivel. Like if you're going the wrong way, you have to swivel, lose the ball for a moment, and then track it down again.
Refine the ball.
However, Penix throws the ball with so much steam, and there wasn't a lot of loft on that. That was more of a line drive. Maybe Odunze noticed that, or at least knows that because he's his quarterback, and says, this is how I have to turn because this is the only way I'll be able to find the ball again if I keep my eyes on it.
But there's an opportunity right there that was, if that ball is thrown in a way in which Odunze, A, can catch it, and B, doesn't have to twist or dive for it, that was 6 right there. That would have, I believe, made it 17-10 in the moment, which would have been a huge get for Washington at the time. Now, they did end up getting 17-10 before halftime, but let's say it's 17-17 at halftime. It's a 17-10 because Washington's defense, with a little help from Michigan's play calling, was really, really good for the middle stretch of that game. That makes it interesting. Penix also had one. And they did a really good job at illustrating this. Kirk Herbstreit pointed this out on the broadcast, where he dumps it down to the tight end Wood. I can't remember his name.
I know who you're talking about.
37.
Yep.
Woodbury, Woodcliff, something.
Former basketball player.
Yeah,
that's who everybody, or how everybody addresses him.
Yeah, he was only Woodstover.
Is that what it is?
I think that's right.
I'm gonna look it up. I'm gonna look it up.
It left my brain. But he dumped it down to our guy Woody, and
not Buzz.
No, not Buzz. It was not Buzz Lightyear. It was Woody. Dumped it down to his tight end when he had, and again, I don't know this guy's name either off the top of my head. 83 streaking down the seam for a for-sure touchdown. Now that one was a result of
Westover.
I
don't know why we went with Wood.
Samsonite. Not even close.
What did I even say before? What did I say?
Woodstock?
No.
Snoopy?
Not Snoopy.
Westover. Where did I come from? I actually have that written down. I don't know where.
Do you?
Yeah, I think
Well,
so.
I don't. So that's more on
anyway,
you than it is
so he
on
dumped
me.
one down to Westover when he had 83 streaking down the middle of the field, uncovered. And that was absolutely going to be 6 as well. Now, that one I give credit to Michigan's defense for rushing him. He wasn't able to get his eyes downfield. And then there was a couple more to Odunze where Penix, and again, this is credit to Michigan, Penix never got his eyes over to Odunze. Now, I don't know why his eyes don't start on Odunze, to be first and foremost. But Odunze ends up breaking open before the ball gets thrown. And Penix missed him on a couple of those as well. So there were missed opportunities. Like, there were opportunities for Washington to not only be in this game, but they had an opportunity to win this game. Michigan executed at a higher level than Washington did. It was they beat up Penix, and I think that was the biggest factor, right? As he got more and more rushed, as he got hit more and more times, you could see his accuracy leaving him. You could see his decision making leaving him. And that is a credit to Michigan because they forced that to happen. I also think you have to add in kind of the enormity of the moment, and you can probably feel it slipping away a little bit. If you're Michael Penix, it gets to 17 or it gets to 20-13, and you're sitting there for a really long time and think you're going to be able to tie it up. And then all of a sudden, Michigan gets up 2 scores again, and you're in the fourth quarter. I think there were about 6 or 7 minutes left when they got that 2-touchdown lead. And at that point, you're pressing and you're feeling like it's getting out of your grasp.
You're forcing a little bit. It never really seemed,
and that's where you saw it get off the rails for Penix.
Yeah, and you never really saw Washington get in a good flow of what they like to do either, because they were forced to throw the short one on the outside. They couldn't get the long ball going. And, something that I want to give Michael Penix credit for, though, is trying to make an opportunity on every single play.
Absolutely. That's part of the reason he got hit so much.
He's not somebody that throws the ball away much, which I think because of always trying to execute, it will make him a really good NFL quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something that I think he also needs to learn, because there was that moment in the third quarter to open things up where he was feeling the pressure and could have thrown that ball out of bounds. Instead, he tries to force it into an area of double coverage, and then it ended up getting picked. And that was, I think, a pretty good learning lesson for him, not just in that game, but moving forward. Like, it's okay to just get the next one.
Yeah.
You don't always have to make the play. I love the competitor in him to make that throw and try to make every throw, but sometimes you just have to cut your losses and just move forward. The other thing that I didn't really love throughout the game, and you kind of touched on it with the holding calls, but the chunk play that Odunze had that was taken back because of a holding call at the line, and I'm not going to sit here and be too critical, but consistency is something that,
it's the key to officiating.
We try and pray and hope,
beg, borrow, and
for.
steal. Yeah.
And, if that was a hold, then, when Odunze tripped over his own feet in the first half, that's a hold.
Well, not just that one, but there was a play before that where Odunze literally has his jersey grabbed.
Right.
There were several
I'm not even looking at the literal holding call.
Yeah.
It almost seemed like the pass rusher for Michigan, it looked like holding. Like, really, like when you see an arm come across the body and then you see a player fall down, like it looks like holding.
Mostly seemed like he tripped.
But if you trip over your own feet, like that's what happened to Odunze in the first half, which is why no holding call was good, which is a good call.
Yeah, it was a good no call there.
Tripped over himself. Like, that wasn't a hold at all. So it's just officials need to find consistency, and that's something I didn't like down the back stretch of that game.
It seemed like it got worse down the back stretch. Yeah,
and you could argue that that's why the game got away from Washington.
It certainly was
Michigan
part of it.
just stayed dominant on offense, and when Washington needed that play to go right, because that chunk play could have done a lot for that team.
Absolutely.
Was that when it was a 2-score game already?
That was, I believe, when it was a 1-score game.
1-score game?
I believe it became a 2-score game on the next drive, because I remember thinking it was at least an 11-point swing there, because that would have gotten Washington into field goal range. And Odunze, and the other thing that I don't think we didn't really talk about is that was the first chunk play Washington had gotten all day. So the psychological effect of, we finally got one, and then they bring it right back. Not to mention, there's a screenshot out there. Go find Mike Golick's Twitter if you want to see it.
Yeah.
That happened on the very next drive. That was not called a holding on Michigan. That's where it got really egregious, and that's where it got frustrating. Again, Michigan probably still wins anyway. They played better.
Yeah, and look, Washington, way too many false start penalties.
Absolutely.
Way too many.
Absolutely. Coming up next, we got Damon Benning. Kicking off hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me. Shane Schilberg producing. We're live on AM 590, ESPN Omaha, and ESPN Tri-Cities. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline, we are joined by our good friend Damon Benning, old DB. What's going on, man?
What's up, fellas? How you doing?
Hey, DB. Good
Oh,
morning, man.
We're doing all right. Just sounds like somebody's trying to break into the back door of the bar here. So we'll try and fight off any invaders while we're on
We'll
the
send
phone with
Shane.
you.
Like legitimately, or did they just maybe want a warm place to not get dumped on?
No, I think it's the snowblower people, but they're like banging on the back door. I don't know what's happening. We're probably fine. If the conversation,
I forgot how good that place was at getting like the snow removal. They're on it.
yeah, they're on top.
They were here before
That-
6:30. I came.
Yeah.
I arrived at 6:30. They were already shoveling and snow blowing.
Yeah, they don't mess around over there.
So, DB, as you're watching that game last night, I know you were on Twitter a little bit talking about some of the reasons Michigan was having so much success running the ball early. What were you seeing that Washington was struggling with in Michigan's run game?
Yeah, so Michigan, it's so good concept-wise, where sometimes they pen, sometimes they pull, sometimes they influence you, and so like defensively, you think, okay, we have to get penetration. It's all about gapping Michigan out, and that's part of it, but what it really is it's playing with good run leverage, where if I'm supposed to use my right shoulder and keep that free, that shoulder better be free. If I'm supposed to split it on the inside, I better be inside. If I'm a backside player, I better be backside, because they're so sound in getting to where they need to be that you can't get impatient and try to play hero ball, right? Because it's such a slow bleed. They run some what we call duo. They run a little inside zone, and it's like, God, this is getting annoying. We got to make a play, right? And so you try to do something that is not your 1 of 11, and their backs are so good and so patient at finding creases, they'll ultimately get you. And they break a lot of tackles. They fall forward quite a bit. It's a slow bleed.
DB, how important is it to recognize that every second, half second, third of a second matters when you're Washington and Michael Penix in this game versus against Texas? Because against Texas, it seemed like, even an extra half second, he was able to make the throw. But against Michigan, he was forcing things. He had to throw it short. He had to get rid of it early because they were just on top of him.
Yeah, so a couple things. Number one, I think Michigan did a little bit better job, like pre-snap, with what they were going to do with their coverage. I had to watch it like real time, go back and watch a little bit of what I felt like he was saying pre-snap. I'm like, God, are they rolling to man? Are they playing quarters? Is this zone match? Is this man match? Like Michigan they're really well coached. So I think the biggest difference between last week and this week for Penix, it obviously, accuracy, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was razor sharp a week ago against Texas. But I felt like it was more because he knew right where he wanted to go with the football. So even if he was under duress, because he doesn't have any problems hanging in there. I mean, he's a tough guy, and he took some shots, and he'll throw the ball in the face of pressure. I think he wasn't getting as clean a looks pre-snap to know where to go with the ball. And they made a lot tougher catches a week ago than I felt like they did last night. It wasn't what I felt like a great night for his wide receiving core either.
We're talking with Damon Benning. DB, I want to settle this because you conveniently ignored some Twitter messages last night. I thought, and I don't think this is why Michigan won the game, but I thought that the way the game was being officiated in terms of what was being allowed to be holding favored Michigan. Is that a crazy take? Is it because I like Kalen DeBoer and I wanted Washington to win? Or did you think Michigan got the better end of the holding calls last night?
No. The more you let those guys play, I think the more it benefits Michigan. I don't think that's like, you don't even have to have a dog in the fight, I think, for that to be the case. The more touchy-feely it got to be, the more because that's more how Michigan plays, right? So you're playing to the Big Ten's strengths in that regard. With regards to what was called, what wasn't, I couldn't get. I'm typically not gonna ever be that guy.
Mm-hmm.
Although there are some missed calls and calls that are bigger than others.
Sure.
Right. Obviously, the 40-yarder that Washington didn't get, and then you give up the ball. Sometimes that can act like a turnover,
mm-hmm.
right, with that penalty. Other times, you start 1st and 20, and you get a first down, and so it's not as egregious. So I felt like the timeliness of when, Washington either didn't get a call or got a call, the QB counter that Michigan ran where there's holding twice at the point of attack, right? And
mm-hmm.
it obviously helps in the run game. But I don't go back and kind of think, well, fudge, if they called this a little different, the outcome would be different. I don't almost ever look at games like that, even though I think part of what you're saying has some truth to it.
DB, recruiting rankings aren't everything, but Washington has shown over the last 2 years that you don't have to be top 30 in order to get into the big game. Kind of a two-part question here. Is what we've seen over the last couple of seasons skewed because of the short tenure of DeBoer paired with the transferring of Michael Penix, or is what they're doing at Washington from a development standpoint real? And maybe add this too, how far off are some of the unusuals, maybe we'll throw the Huskers into this, at being what the Huskies are now?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question. There's a lot in there. I think let's tackle 2 and 1, the recruiting rankings and versus development. Obviously, those two things have to go together, right? You need a certain percentage of the guys that you bring into the program to be multi-year starters, right? You have to get 2.5 or greater years in terms of production on probably 55% of your recruiting class. You have to be able to do that over and over again for major contributions. The great equalizer, though, and you mentioned Penix, is the transfer portal. So the portal allows you to kind of supplement what you're already doing in terms of development in case you need to get over the hump in a little bit quicker fashion. Is what Washington doing sustainable? I mean, sure, as long as there's guys, McMillans and Dunzeys and guys like that are going to develop into high level guys, you're going to give yourself a chance. But as we saw, a lot of times the difference last night, and there's a couple differences, I think, was the depth of Michigan along the D line and how good that secondary was. That secondary, Michigan doesn't get near enough credit for, I think, how good and how physical they are. So, and make no mistake about it, teams that play for championships win on the perimeter, whether it's making plays in the passing game, handling perimeter run blocking, or tackling out of the secondary or the second level with like your adjusters or your outside linebackers. Those teams win. We fall in love with what happens in the trenches, and it's the most important. But the sneaky little thing is teams that can play and raise trophies are really good on the perimeter. And you saw Michigan, I think DJ said something about this last night on Twitter, which I was kind of marveling at all game. Michigan's ability to tackle, rally, and get guys to the ground and not allow any running after the catch. A lot of that is what Washington's offense is predicated on. Hey, my free guy on your free guy, and, we're ultimately going to make a play. And Michigan just didn't allow that to happen. So I think, as you're looking at blueprints to develop programs, you obviously have to have depth up front. Right, you want to. Mason Graham and those guys are coming back next year, and Michigan was just rolling guys out, and I felt like they clearly were better than Washington's offensive line last night. And then you want to be able to go grab a couple of key pieces to get you over the hump, whether it be sometimes it's a quarterback. Sometimes, I mean, we'll see for Ohio State. I mean, is it gonna, like a guy like Judkins? Like, is it going to be a running back, a guy that adds some physicality or dimension to kind of get you over the hump if you have the other thing? So I think situationally the portal has been a good balance, but I don't think you cannot recruit at a top 25 level and routinely make runs at championships. Although I think there's a much better case to be made for it, being able to get some key additions in the portal.
DB, you mentioned winning on the perimeter versus winning in the trenches. To you, is that the difference between like in Iowa and a Michigan or a, Wisconsin from a handful of years ago?
100%. It's such a dynamic game, and playmakers get out in space. I think being able to handle those guys and neutralize the way that the game is going is huge. And I tell guys, everybody wants to be, offensive guys steal the show, right? I want to be a wide receiver. And it's like, you see it in 7-on-7 all the time. It's like, you need guys to cover these guys too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Michigan safeties were so good last night and sound. I felt like it really was a stark contrast into what was happening with Washington, vice versa, because all of Michigan's concepts force all 11 guys to be accountable. So even if you're not handling guys up front, like Washington's offensive line wasn't, what was their answer? They went to the screen game and kind of the quick game. Well, you have to be able to rally and make plays out there in space to not allow guys to run after the catch. And so I think that is a big difference when you talk about, like, let's say in Iowa versus Michigan, because Iowa schematically, defensively is unbelievable, right? I mean, Coach Parker and that staff know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly how to play. But sometimes it's just my guy is better than your guy. So I think the totality of the package in terms of being able to be dynamic outside the numbers is a little bit underappreciated, especially defensively. It's easy to see wide outs and get slots and running backs out in space, but you watch those defenders that can make plays along the hash and along the numbers at the second and third levels. It changes the way you can play defensively.
We're talking with Damon Benning, former Husker and voice of Nebraska football on the Husker Radio Network. DB, how do you weigh in your mind, if you do at all, the sort of baggage that's carried along with Michigan this season versus what you saw on the field, right? Because we saw a pretty dominating performance for the game last night. Obviously, we saw them go 15-0, but there's this cloud hanging over the entire season from all the different issues that they had. How do you process those two things in your head?
Well, it's tough, right? I mean, it obviously matters. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone to such great lengths.
They wouldn't have been doing it, right?
to do it. So I don't want to be dismissive of that, but I can't help but think, like, okay, if Michigan's running pull or power, or they're pulling, and how are we going to play a down block? And they threw Dunze the ball and he's got to catch it, or he got out to Will Nixon and he's got to make. So I don't ever discount that when I'm watching actual competition. Okay, are my guys making plays? So that's usually number one for me when I look at evaluating watching a game. It's not necessarily, oh man, if they're in a 3-by-1 and they motion, does Michigan know that this is what they like to do, right? But I know that that's a real thing. So I guess the long-winded answer is, does it bug me? Yeah, because I think it's hard enough to compete without those kinds of going to those lengths for competitive advantages. But I do think ultimately you still have to line up and play it too. And that's just kind of my personality, right? I think at the end of the day, you still got to see me and I still have to see you. So that's usually what I land on, but I don't for 1 minute think that, Michigan is going to embrace and may have to embrace kind of being the villain for a while. Because I think a fair enough of quality coaches were upset with kind of how this whole season and last season played out for them to not be thought of very highly. But I mean, Michigan's here to stay for a while. I think depending on what happens with McCarthy and Harbaugh, get Will Johnson and Graham and some of these guys back, they'll easily be. I mean, they get McCarthy back. I mean, you could be top 5.
Mm-hmm.
Without him, you still have enough talent to certainly be preseason top 10. And because I think there'll probably be 6 Big Ten teams, although 3 of them are new: Oregon, Washington, and USC. Will all be in the preseason top 25. So it's going to be some ball to be played.
DB, you mentioned McCarthy, and he's somebody this season that I halfway through, I'm like, man, he looks pretty good. And before the season, I'm like, I think he's going to have a big year, but I think that kind of tailed off toward the back end. I don't think he played his best football. How have you kind of evaluated his play this season from what he was last year to what he was this year?
He makes a lot of key plays. So, and I get it. He had a stretch last night where I think he'd only made about 2 really good throws.
Mm-hmm.
But when they needed drives to answer and kind of stem the momentum, he seemed to be okay. And I like guys that it doesn't always have to look a certain way for them to be productive. He's got all the tools, right? He's grown into his body. He's gotten a lot bigger, a lot stronger. He's got really good arm talent. I think he has the mental makeup for a guy that, because he seems to be really confident,
mm-hmm.
and he doesn't always need to be functioning at a super efficient level for him to feel like he has value. Right? I think he just kind of does. He just kind of does his business. So I like the way that he plays, and I think it's interesting because, Drew, I think it was you that asked the question this summer to one of the Michigan writers, maybe it was a little longer ago, where you said, if Michigan makes the run that people think they can make, will the storyline be Corum or McCarthy?
Mm-hmm.
And I think whomever we were talking to said it would be more about McCarthy. And I think, while those running backs, well, in particular Corum, I mean, Edwards, he decided to show up last night. Wow. I do think getting guys like Roman Wilson and Loveland and the ability to play catch and kind of scramble. You see when he got the run game going last night from the quarterback run game with McCarthy, I think he ultimately was the difference, because in games, even for as good as Michigan was up front and could run the ball and good defensively, you still had to have more than adequate quarterback play, especially when it was like versus like. And I think McCarthy held his own.
All right, DB, we've got about 4 minutes left here. I wanted to give you an opportunity with the election of Frank Solich into the College Football Hall of Fame. I know he's an incredibly important figure in your life. Obviously was your position coach when you were at Nebraska. I just wanted to give you a few minutes here to kind of talk about not just how much that Frank Solich deserves the honor that he's getting by going into the College Football Hall of Fame, but also kind of the impact he had on Nebraska football as a whole over his, close to 40 years of being affiliated with the program.
Yeah, it's funny. And I know it always sounds like sometimes I'll say, oh, I just talked to, but yesterday, talking to him about, coincidentally, things that didn't have anything to do with the Hall of Fame. I came back and I said, hey, congratulations again on the Hall of Fame. And I said 2 things after that. And he didn't even acknowledge the Hall of Fame.
That sounds about right.
He totally glossed over it, right? And I just feel like there's so many things that I admire about a guy like that. He's just really unassuming. He's tough-minded. He kind of hangs in there. And a lot of kind of those attributes are things that I kind of gravitate towards, right? I was never, the biggest, the fastest, or the best, but I mean, he was one of those guys that always said, just hang in there, right? You make one day 2, make 2 days 3. Like, he would say these little things, and they were absolutely paramount in order to even function in such a competitive room that we were in, right? Because if that's not how you felt, then you couldn't make it. And I remember he said something to me. I was just getting ready to redshirt, and I'm, weird. I'm pouting and kind of being a baby. And he said, "I can't be your biggest fan." Right? Like you have to require more of you than I do. That's a start, right? Like, basically they weren't saying the term then, but he was like, "Hey, get out of your feelings." And I saw a clip last night that AJ Forbes said after the game versus Montana or against South Dakota State. And he said, what message would I give to the young guys? And he basically said the same thing. Like, you have to expect more out of you than anybody else does. And if you can do that, you'll be just fine. That's totally Coach Solich. Whether he was at Nebraska, he was at Ohio, it doesn't really matter what he's doing. He has a standard that's his own, where he comes across as unwavering. Like, he's just relentless in competing. He doesn't do it with words, or he's not real demonstrative. He just keeps coming. And I think some people will call that perseverance. Some people, it has lots of adjectives if you want to get into the semantics world. But at the end of the day, I think it's his humility and his ability to stay the course that separates him. Because I try to tell people, and I believe this, truly being great is just being good all the time. Limit the peaks and valleys. If you limit the peaks and valleys, you give yourself a chance for consistency, because those that you're competing with or against or in the job market or whatever, typically there's a little more EKG to them. And those that can kind of flatline and just be consistent all the time usually achieve greatness, because a lot of things that come with greatness have to do with longevity. And longevity comes with the ability to stay the course, and that's definitely Coach Solich.
Damon Benning, former Husker, voice of the Husker Radio Network. DB, we appreciate your time as always. Really good stuff there.
Oh, man, anytime. Appreciate you guys.
Thanks,
All right,
DB.
Take care, DB.
You got it.
That is our good friend DB coming.
Great friend.
Because
Because if you're good for a long time, you're great.
exactly, he's been good friend for a long time, so he's a great friend. Great point there. Coming up next, we've got more of Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. We're halfway through the show here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on a snowy Tuesday morning. The snow plows and trucks with blades on them are out in full force here in La Vista. We're live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities. Coming up in 15 minutes, we're going to talk to Anthony Broome from the Wolverine, talk a little bit more Michigan football. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you about the Omaha Supernovas. It's pro time in Nebraska. We know we love our volleyball here. We love our college volleyball here. It's time that pro volleyball takes its hold in Nebraska, as well as the Supernovas hit the court for the first ever Pro Volleyball Federation match on January 24th. That date keeps getting closer and closer against the Atlanta Vibe at the CHI Health Center. First serve set for 7 p.m. You can get season tickets or single game tickets at supernovas.com. You're talking about world-class talent from both the Supernovas and the Atlanta Vibe. NCAA champions, All-Americans, Olympians, they will all be present at that match. Join the volleyball movement sweeping across the country and see your Major League Volleyball team, the Omaha Supernovas. Go to supernovas.com for tickets or more information.
We call that
Certainly it's warming up here in the second half.
promotion
It is a pro motion
for pro fit.
for pro volleyball here in Nebraska.
Well, they are the right fit.
They are the right fit for any volleyball fan
Yeah.
here in Nebraska. Speaking of professionals,
I'll proclaim that. Sorry.
I'm just gonna keep going. Speaking of professionals, we there's some interesting things that came out from Draymond Green, which is always he tests my patience, Andrew. I am a very big Warriors fan, but more importantly, I'm a Steph Curry fan. So I want what's best for Steph Curry more than I want what's best for the rest of the Warriors. That needs to be made clear here. Draymond Green is not what's best for Steph Curry. He hasn't been for a while, and I find it very frustrating. Obviously, he's had a couple of violent incidents on the court this year, was suspended indefinitely by the NBA, and apparently in a call with Adam Silver said he was going to retire. And Adam Silver, according to Draymond, which I take everything Draymond says with a little bit of grain of salt, he strikes me as one of those guys that's like 40% full of crap. Like not all the way, but like 40% full of crap.
Right.
And
this one is hard to lie about, though.
Well, so here's let me play out the way I think this conversation may have gone, and Draymond is taking it a different way. So what Draymond says happened was he had a call with Adam Silver. He's like, hey, I just can't take this anymore. I can't do this. I'm going to retire. And Adam Silver, according to Draymond Green, says that's a really rash decision. I'm not going to let you do that. Okay. What I could very easily see that, like, I don't look at that conversation and say, oh, he talked me out of retiring. To me, that's a very simple, like, hey, why don't you sleep on that before you make such a big decision? Like, don't do anything rash.
Yeah, I mean, maybe,
like, to me, that's not talking someone out of
maybe
retiring.
overblowing the fact that somebody talked him out of it.
Right.
I can get behind, but when Draymond's in such a vulnerable state, and Silver's just kind of there to not only listen but also advise.
Sure, yeah.
And the way that he advises is kind of like a parent would advise you to make a situation or make a decision on a situation.
Me at all if Silver was very empathetic and trying to be understanding and stuff like that. I think calling what he did, at least in Draymond's words, talking him out of retirement is overblown.
Now, it just depends, though, how long the conversation actually was, because they said it was a long and deep conversation.
Yes, there's probably a lot more in there.
But is long and deep like 7 minutes or is long and deep like 37 minutes?
Well, and it depends on who it is, right? It depends on your relationship with that person. There's some people where if I talk to them for 10 minutes, I'm like, yeah, they sat and talked to me for a really long time. Like, it was really cool. And there's people that I've talked to for hours before, and it's like, oh, that's just a conversation with my buddy. So I agree with you. There's long variance there. But the point that I wanted to make as a Warriors fan, but as a Steph Curry fan primarily, Adam Silver, why you got to do that to me?
He's doing it because
let him retire.
Well, so he's doing it in a lot of ways, and I'm kind of recycling this because I heard it, but I agreed with it at the time that I heard it. That Golden State is such a value to the NBA in terms of viewership that if Draymond leaves the Warriors, do the Warriors make the playoffs without him?
I mean, they're not really trying to make
$1 million question. I mean, you can say that, but he's been gone for a huge chunk of games,
like 19, like about half their season so far.
Right. So if he's there, maybe you just cut it in half, and they're still a
about 500 team.
Maybe they're a play-in team, right? Who knows? But in order for them to actually be competitive, he needs to be a part of that team right now.
So let me push back here. Okay, he just signed a 4-year, $100 million extension.
I'm with you.
He is in year one of that extension.
I know. I'm with you.
If you sacrifice the Warriors' competitiveness this year, I think without his albatross of a contract, they can become more competitive in future years.
They could, but Adam Silver is so worried about every year in the immediate year that he doesn't want to take a step back at any point.
You got to think long term.
So if Golden State can be in the playoffs this year, that means money in his pocket. That means money in the league's pocket.
You got to think long term.
That's why I think when he's so empathetic in this conversation, I'm not going to try to say that he's not a.
No, I think he actually
cares.
He's
not caring for the players in the league. But at some point, you also have to.
He still has to do his job.
You have to put on the glasses and just say,
yeah, he has to do his job.
Okay, like, bro, you you're actually a menace to this league.
But
You
you're good for
aren't helping
ratings?
us anymore. Let's do something different. Maybe you're better off being on the studio desk somewhere versus on the hardwood. And that's that's how you can care for a player, but also kind of like
care about the bottom line.
Well, also care about the league.
Yeah,
right.
That's what I mean. The bottom line of the league.
Because at some point, I talked about integrity at the beginning of the show, and you need some integrity here in this moment too. You don't want this to become a circus. And that's what it's turning into with Draymond. All of his acts are becoming so out there that you just can't put up with it anymore.
Well, much like the rest of the country, I'm over circuses in general. The circus industry is not doing well in America. I don't know if you're aware of this. I think, the Ringling Brothers or Barnum and Bailey's, one of them is died out after 120 years.
Hey, don't make me start singing The Greatest Showman now.
I low-key love that movie.
From now on. Hold on, slap your legs.
I'll slap the table.
And we will come together.
The problem that I've got, though, is I've been watching this Draymond circus for years. I am over it. I'm done. First of all, I can't believe they re-signed him to $100 million for 4 years. That made me angry. I can't believe that. And this, honestly, is a bigger frustration with the Warriors front office than it has been with Adam Silver itself. Because when you have, and I know I throw this term out there sometimes in places where people don't like it, but when you have a generational superstar in Steph Curry, which that's undeniable. If anybody fights me on that, I will actually fight you. But if you've got a generational superstar in Steph Curry, you don't try and play both sides and be like, oh, we're going to build for the future too. No. You trade Kuminga, you trade Moody, you trade Wiseman when they still have value, not after you've ridden them into the ground and be like, oh, these guys are worthless. And you get him more titles. Because guess what? You're not getting another Steph Curry. It's not happening. Instead of selling high on Jordan Poole, they sold low, and they got an 800-year-old Chris Paul in return. Congratulations. That is where this frustration, and Draymond is just a part of that. Adam Silver, just let the man retire so I don't have to deal with him anymore.
And this is a selfish claim.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because even if there's no more titles out there for the Warriors, and I doubt there are, I at least want to enjoy watching the end of Steph Curry's career over the next few years. And that's really hard to do with Draymond.
You don't have to convince me that a Band-Aid needs to be ripped off.
Yeah.
You don't have to convince me of that at all.
Get out of here.
All I'm saying is when it comes down to making money, that's what Adam Silver's priority or is at least number one on his priority list. And so he's going to do that any way he can. And that's by making the Warriors stay relevant.
I just don't know how relevant they stay with Draymond. And I don't know how much money Draymond makes for the league versus, I don't know. I don't know that Draymond staying on the team this year actually makes them relevant.
Could you say he brings you some personal injury?
He does, but I'm hoping nobody has any personal injuries out there driving in these conditions. One way you can help ensure that is using your seatbelt. It saves lives and prevents injuries, but only if worn properly. Make it click. This message from the NDOT Highway Safety Office. Make sure you're driving safe out there in these conditions. Coming up next, Anthony Broome from the Wolverine, part of the On3 network. We're going to talk a little bit of Michigan winning a national title here on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Wrapping up hour number 2 here on Hurrdat Sports Radio on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, as we are connecting with Anthony Broome from the Wolverine, part of the On3 network. Here, I want to tell you about who you need to connect with if, unfortunately, in this inclement weather, your car gets dinged up a little bit, and that's our friends at Dingman's Collision Center. My guy Andrew here went over there yesterday. He got his car dinged up, unrelated to the weather, but he's getting
a long time ago, it seems.
He's getting it all fixed up. He got the rental car and everything going. But Dingman's Collision Center in business in Omaha, family owned and operated for over 25 years. First place Best of Omaha, 18 years running. They're experts, and you can trust them. They've got 4 great Omaha area locations. They can work on all of whatever cars you have, from Fords to Teslas, anything in between, because they've got the latest technology. They've also got a give back program that gives back to the community with every car repaired. Make sure you check out dingmans.com for more information. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook Hotline is Anthony Broome from the Wolverine. Anthony, how are you this morning?
A little sleep deprived.
What time did you get to bed last night, Anthony?
Oh gosh, a little after 4:00. So it's a coffee morning, but we sleep in February. We've been saying. So.
Unbelievable. 4:00. That's about when I got up this morning.
Oh my gosh.
Well, Anthony, we appreciate you getting up early for us to talk a little bit about Michigan and their national championship. I'm curious from a personal standpoint, as somebody who covers the team. I've never been a primary, somebody who primarily covered a national champion before, or a world champion in pro sports or whatever. What's that like from just a professional standpoint, where you've gotten to cover this team all season? Obviously, they've come close the last couple of years. They finally break through this year. Just what's that like from a job standpoint in getting to witness something like this up close and personal?
Yeah, I mean, as a guy, this was year 9 for me in covering this team, which overlaps with when Jim Harbaugh got to Michigan. And,
yeah,
you got to experience the come up. You got to experience the being back in the conversation. And then, 2016, you have some setbacks. 2018, 2019, some heartbreaking moments in there. 2020, things kind of bottom out during that COVID season. And then this run over the last 3 years has been remarkable. And one of the most, I won't say out of left field. I think Michigan has always been capable of doing what they did last night. But so many things have to go right. And so many guys have to be on the same page to do it. And what stands out the most to me, just hours after, watching them do what they did is that it is hard to pull off. And you got to have the right group of guys. You have to have the right staff that puts those guys in positions to succeed. And you got to have a little bit of luck along the way too.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I mean, it's, the reason you get into this profession is with the dream, the hope, the desire that if you're covering a team, they're in that not only in that conversation, but this is kind of what you hope the type of ride you hope to go on with the squad. And when it's been, 9 years for me, almost 10 years now, there is again, I'm sure when I have a little more caffeine in me and a few more hours, there'll be some more to reflect on it. But it is remarkable. And, to be on the road 13 of the last 15 days and have confetti from the Rose Bowl and now the national title game that you shovel into your pocket as a memento, as a memory, that's in your wildest dreams as anyone in this profession. It's tough to, you always dream of it, but once you're there, it's still kind of surreal. So I guess that's just where I am right now with it.
Anthony, where do you stand with how Michigan did it this season? Because from the national view, if you just scroll through Twitter, I mean, the scandals get brought up over and over again. And, I guess, are you worried this one could have an asterisk by it at all?
Well, people are going to put an asterisk by it. They did the same thing with the New England Patriots. They did the same thing with the Houston Astros. I tend to believe that if there is some sort of punishment that comes from all that, and again, it's tough to. We still aren't really even sure what rules were broken, who was involved. I mean, there's still probably years. We're still probably years away from knowing the breadth of the story. And the one thing that I've learned covering this team is that people hate Michigan regardless. So there's always going to be something. But like I said, we did a post-game show last night, and something I told people is that, I've got the confetti in my pocket. I've got the pictures from the field. And, if you're a Michigan fan, you're going to drop, hundreds of dollars on national championship gear. And to me, you just kind of point to that. Like, they got it done. And, people saying, oh, well, if Georgia had gotten in, Georgia maybe would beat any of these 4 teams. Well, they didn't beat one of the 4 teams, and that's why they weren't there. So Michigan fought through everything, and I said, some of it self-inflicted, we could probably argue, but they were the last team standing, and they exit this season as the national champion and get to claim that for the next, 364 days, whatever it is. And, that's fans should not, at this point, who cares what the people say about you? Your team got it done. And you just kind of point to the hat you're wearing, point to the shirt you're wearing, point to the scoreboard, whatever you want to do. But, Michigan fans have been through too much as a fan base to worry about anything but the fact that the team finally not only got to the championship game, but got it done.
Yeah, you got to love the mental gymnastics of SEC fans trying to convince themselves that Georgia, who lost to Alabama, who lost to Michigan, would, be the best team in the country when, they had every opportunity to be here. So that's always fun to deal with. Got to love the good old SEC, right? Anthony, as you reflect on this season, obviously there's still some looming questions about the future of Jim Harbaugh. I know we talked to you before this game kind of to get your thoughts a little bit about where you thought he stood after a national championship at Michigan. Do you think it is more likely or less likely than it was a week ago that he moves on?
I think something I told you guys is that in my 9 years covering this team, things with Jim Harbaugh never reach their logical conclusion. Him winning a national championship 3 years after his, being on the ropes during that COVID season, that is not its logical conclusion. I'll say this. I still think any and all options are on the table. I think that NFL teams are right to court him. He's one of the best coaches in the history of the sport at any level. But last night, he talked about this is what the fascinating thing about Jim Harbaugh. In almost the same sentence or same press conference, whatever it was, he was talking about, just wanting to, why does there always have to be what's next? Why can't I just enjoy this right now? And then he also went on to, he started talking about how they're going to push spring football back a month to get these guys some time to rest. So he's thinking about spring football already, and he's got confetti in his ears and in his hat and in his pockets too. So I don't know. I don't know what happens. But if this is how the story ends at Michigan, then I can't think of a better ending for him. But I could see him being the head coach for 5 more days. I could see him being the head coach for 5 more years. I think it's all still on the table.
Anthony, is J.J. McCarthy returning still on the table in your mind, or is he headed to the NFL?
I think it's on the table. Again, I know a lot of the buzz yesterday was that maybe he was leaning towards an exit from Michigan. I think we'll see what happens. Now, getting NIL sorted out, finding out who wants to come back, who needs what. They're going to get back to Ann Arbor. They're probably going to have a parade this weekend. And then a lot of guys have a lot of decisions to make. So JJ's one of them. Again, he's another guy who would put in that 50-50 category, but I could see that going either way as well.
You mentioned a parade this weekend here in Omaha. The high is like -4, I think, on Sunday, and like the low is -16. What's the weather going to be like for that parade up in Michigan?
Honestly, I've spent the better part of the last 2 weeks in Los Angeles and Houston, so I have no grasp of what I'm coming back to in the Midwest. So I assume cold, but a lot of people will be charged up for that, and they'll show up no matter what, because people have been waiting a long time for this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Anthony, real quick, got about 30 seconds here. As one of the biggest blue bloods in the country, how strange is it to think that this is Michigan's first outright title since 1948? That doesn't even sound right to say out loud, but the only other one was that split with Nebraska in 97. How strange is that for a program of this caliber?
It is strange because the bulk of the accomplishments they hang their hat on happened, back in, the
pre-World War II. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's program affirming. You belong in that conversation. You're capable of being in that conversation. And this doesn't have to be like a Cinderella 3-year run. I mean, there's no reason Michigan can't continue to be a factor in the 12-team playoff and make a push for this thing. So it is surreal. But we'll see where it goes from there. But for now, they're the last team standing this year, and that's all they care about.
Anthony Broome from the Wolverine. Thanks for joining us, and try and get some sleep, all right?
I will try. Thanks, guys.
Appreciate you, man.
That's Anthony Broome from the Wolverine, part of the On3 network on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline. Kicking off next hour with our friend Mike Schaefer from Husker 24/7 Sports, next on Hurrdat Sports Radio. Welcome into Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi, Lulla, Andrew Rogers here with me, kicking off hour number 3. And we are on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln for this third hour. We're live from the Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. Starting to clear up a little bit, it seems, as the plows get out and the snow. It looks like the snow stopped. I can't really tell. It was a little windy earlier. Seems like maybe it's
We are
down
in
a
one
little bit.
spot. So
It's true, yeah.
It's clearing up where we are.
Yeah, it's literally just in the like 30 square feet that I'm looking outside at. It appears to have cleared up a little bit. So hopefully
I can see
I can
concrete.
Yeah, I can see a little bit of wind blowing now too, though. So hopefully you're safe wherever you are. Hopefully you were able to stay home. We braved it. We got out here okay.
And the roads were not
Not great.
not clean.
Not great. Not ideal, but that's
Shane
okay.
texted in our group and he's like, "Hey, like it's clear by me." I'm like, "Wow, great. Maybe they got on the roads early." And then I'm driving up the side roads to get to Hurrdat Sports Bar and Grill. Yep, Shane, you're a big liar.
It was literally just his parking lot was clean. His parking lot was clean, which I did appreciate. But I want to tell you about our friends over at Warhorse Sportsbook and Casino. We've been talking a little bit. No, we didn't do well on our props yesterday, but that's okay because you've got a chance to, not just you, me, everyone has a chance to be involved in their Festival of Games coming up for the big game in the Professional Football Championship on February 11th. They are doing another prop card challenge. They did one for the national championship last night. They're doing one for the big game on February 11th as well for your chance to win $100,000 if you can go 25 for 25 on that prop card. But even if you don't, all your entries get put into a drawing for a $20,000 cash or free slot play drawing prize as well. It's free to participate for Warhorse Rewards members. You have to go between now and February 1st to the casino in Lincoln to earn entries. You can earn entries for every $50 sportsbook ticket that you submit. And all you got to do, Andrew did it over the weekend, go down to the casino in Lincoln, swipe your rewards card, and validate those entries to make sure you are eligible for those prizes. That is the Warhorse Sportsbook Festival of Games. And do we have Schaefer?
We do. He's here.
Joining us now
He's here.
on that Warhorse Sportsbook hotline is our guy, Mike J. Schaefer of Husker 24/7. Jay, what's going on, man?
Oh, not much. It's NFL playoff season. You guys are hyping up the big game. Whenever we're hearing big game, we know the NFL playoffs are around the corner. Andrew and I's team are not in, but Ravi, congratulations on making it. I know it was a shock to you and everyone else, but the San Francisco 49ers were able to qualify.
Hey, but we do. The Bears at least have a win in one department because coming in April, the best time of year to be a Bears fan when you have a top pick in the draft.
Yeah, that's I don't know, the like sort of love that the fans were giving Justin Fields and leading up to that Lambeau performance and game, and now you have the number 1 pick, and you could get a maybe younger, better, cheaper version of him at number 1 overall while trading him to Atlanta. To me, if the Falcons don't make an offer for Justin Fields and just build around their young nucleus of players with a guy who is from the Atlanta area that probably needs a scenery change as much as anybody in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are we even doing?
Mm-hmm.
And they fired Arthur Smith. They're doing all the right things in Atlanta right now.
Schaefer, what's the right price for Justin Fields? Because that's where I keep trying to figure out, right?
Kyle Pitts.
I think it's a first and a third.
First and a third. I would say because 2 firsts seems like too much.
Too much. First and a second is too much. First and a third, like a mid-third round pick. Or if you get a future second, I guess. If you get a first in 2024 and a second in 2025, if you're the Bears, you got to take that, right? Like,
absolutely.
I mean, That's so much
No
draft
brainer.
capital, 3 first-round picks, an additional pick in the top 60 in the future draft. Like I don't think you can get 2 ones for him, but I definitely think you can get a first. And if you can get Atlanta's first, that's another top 14 pick right there.
Yeah, it's top half. It's a top half pick
Yeah.
for sure.
So
Yeah, that's interesting because I figured you could get at least a first, but that didn't seem like enough. But 2 firsts seemed like too much.
yeah.
I think you're probably right. First and a third, first and a future second, maybe makes sense.
It wouldn't shock me though if it's a first and a second this year, because it just seems like teams love to overpay. And
You think of a team like Atlanta that's a little bit desperate to make it all
Right.
work. Like you could definitely
and
you
they've
can
got
get
some
someone to spend.
pieces. They've got some pieces
Oh, yeah.
already in
they've got
place.
great pieces.
That's what I mean. They've
And
got
Kyle
need a head
Pitts actually
coach.
looked okay this year.
They need to trade for Justin Fields, or well, if they don't do that,
they need to
should
get a
be
quarterback.
they should be the first team talking with the Detroit Lions offensive coordinator. Was it Ben Johnson? Is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, that is the sort of coach I think they need to target. Like, you need someone who can creatively use your pieces and not Arthur Smith ever again. He should be banned from the state of Georgia. He shouldn't be allowed anywhere near it. His name should bring up like the sort of reaction that General Sherman would, like over 100 years ago. Like that's how bad Arthur Smith was for the Falcons, and they just need to move on from that immediately.
Does anybody else like see the resemblance of Big Cat and Arthur Smith? Like, am I the only one that like sees that?
They do kind of look like they could be like cousins. I don't think they look like I wouldn't confuse them for each other.
See, I think
Physically, they're pretty different, right?
Size-wise, I think it's in the face.
I think it's definitely the face, and I think it's just the sort of mustache, right? Really?
maybe. I think it's the eyes too, a little bit.
I think we're leaning heavy on the mustache here,
Like-
but that's okay.
Like, look at that guy. Like, that's got a little Big Cat in him. I don't know. I just showed him a photo.
He's like
Schaefer.
you
You can't see it.
I think he's like a Big Cat older brother, maybe. Are there any of the college coaches that get brought up for head coaching jobs that you think, hey, that guy kind of makes sense in a place like Atlanta? I'm trying to think of an offensive minded college coach that maybe would get a sniff in the NFL. Do any of those guys come to mind for you, or you think they go maybe an NFL offensive coordinator route?
I think they probably go the coordinator route. I mean, the NFL is such a copycat league. I mean, everyone's right now looking at who's the 49ers nominal offensive coordinator, like that guy's probably going to get a job.
Hey, it worked out for Mike McDaniel.
Yeah. So, well, and look at Sean McVay. I mean, Zach Taylor and Kevin O'Connell and guys like that. So it's definitely a copycat league. I'd be surprised if we saw a college coach show. I shouldn't say that. I mean, I think we're going to see Jim Harbaugh somewhere, and I think it's probably going to be the LA Chargers from the early sounds of things. But beyond Harbaugh, who's sort of in his own category in a lot of ways in life, there's nobody else that makes a lot of sense to me that you would reach down and try to go. I mean, honestly, the guy across from Harbaugh last night is probably the one that would be most interesting at this point. And quite frankly, if you're Seattle and you have Pete Carroll and he's going into, age 72 season or whatever it is, that would be sort of interesting if they're like, we're going to go get Kalen DeBoer. This worked for us last time. And obviously, Pete Carroll, sort of like Jim Harbaugh, an entirely different category where you're an NFL guy that then goes to college that then comes back to the NFL. Now, Harbaugh was a little bit less that, but I just don't know that there's anyone else that, and maybe I'm just completely blanking. I don't think Ryan Day makes sense.
What about a guy sorry, not to cut you off there.
No, you're good.
What about a guy like a Lane Kiffin or a Steve Sarkisian that have some experience in the NFL already?
I don't think there's an NFL owner that is willing to let Lane Kiffin be Lane Kiffin for their NFL franchise.
Fair.
Now, I can't say that with 100% certainty because, quite frankly, I can probably only name like 12 NFL owners if I'm being really honest. It's like college ADs, you can name 10 of them and 20 of them could be standing right in front of you and you'd have no idea.
Right.
What about like Sark though? Sark's got the coordinating
Sark,
experience in the NFL.
Same thing. I mean, he's someone that's interesting to me because of sort of the level of experience that he has, and I think his offenses are interesting. And I think that he would want to maybe pursue that, but I don't know that there's anyone where it's just like feels like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me right now in this time. I think there's some names to sort of keep an eye on, but I don't know that there's anyone where it's just like, yeah, this totally makes it. I would love, obviously, he just left for a different job. I would have loved if an NFL owner was like, who's basically won everywhere and just deserves an opportunity to see what he can do at this level. I would love if someone's like, okay, what was that?
I said the South Dakota State head coach.
Well, he's
I'm just kidding.
He's got 1 year of experience there.
I'm just kidding.
But Willie Fritz, it'd be amazing if someone's like, you know what, this guy's won at every level.
We're
going to bring in Willie Fritz for like a 5-year run. We're going to see what he can do. And the first year is going to be terrible. And then year 2 is going to be interesting. And then year 3, we're going to be rolling. And then he's like 71 years old. And, we're going to pass it off to somebody else. But I'm a huge Willie Fritz guy, and I would love to have seen him get an opportunity in the NFL. But that is not going to happen. And that's okay.
Schaefer, speaking of like just people to keep an eye on, we saw 2 big additions to Nebraska's offense over the weekend, but the status of Jamal Banks, that's what people are wondering about right now. Do you think he ends
just Jamal Banks? People aren't wondering about Stephon Thompson?
Maybe Thompson
we're wondering.
Too.
We're all
maybe
wondering.
Thompson too, but Banks was the high caliber name there.
Yeah, I think both of those guys are going to be making decisions, here in the middle of the week. Could be today, could be tomorrow. They're both, Banks a little more talkative than Thompson. Thompson has more or less told people he is not interested in talking during the process. It hasn't stopped us from trying. We're not great at the listening part there at times as an industry as a whole, but they're both probably going to make a decision here pretty soon. Players report at Nebraska on Saturday, and I think they want to have as many of these guys on campus as soon as they can. And so they had Thompson in, they had Banks in, they got Nair, they got
Dowdell.
They got Dowdell, and they never ended up hosting. I don't even know how you pronounce the first name, but they never ended up hosting the Idaho linebacker. Whose last name is Alexander, and that's very easy to say. So
the other part is not easy to say.
Yeah, is it Zyrie?
I was told it was pronounced X-ray, and I don't know if they were messing with me or not.
That is not what I have heard, but I didn't. I could have very easily been like thrown something on YouTube.
Maybe he just goes by X-Ray as like a nickname.
Yeah, it could be. That would make a lot more sense.
I don't know.
That would lead to some really interesting NIL opportunities that few others would have. Right?
Welcome to Ortho, Nebraska, brought to you by X-Ray Alexander.
Nebraska Orthopedics. That's great. I like that. I like that a lot. Anyways, well, it's not going to happen here. And real quickly, kudos to that guy. He's trying to take like 8 visits, and he was going to try to get to Nebraska for like 6 hours. And they're like, we're good. We're not going to do this. We're not interested.
Okay, so where do you think they are on Banks? That's the one that as Andrew mentioned, he's that big-bodied wide receiver. He's got Power 5 production. I think that's the one. I know linebacker is important, but we only care about offense around here. What's the status on him as far as you're concerned?
Yeah, the thing with Banks is I'm trying to figure out who the real competition is. It feels like it's very much Nebraska's out in front. I know Notre Dame was involved, but they're out, and so he's not going to go to Notre Dame. And then the other school that got mentioned to me, and this before the visit, and certainly before their win last night, was Michigan. And so, but they are going to be in a weird spot with their coaching situation, unless they just come out and just announce Harbaugh stepping away, and then the OC is going to take over, and that's where they're at, and everything else is going to stay the same. I think Nebraska is in a pretty good spot for Jamal Banks right now. And I think because he's making a relatively quick decision after this visit to Nebraska, I think because Nebraska needs wide receivers and needs, I shouldn't say needs wide, they need a veteran presence, certainly in that room. And I think he can offer that. I think his physical size makes him intriguing because you like guys that, how do I say this without being offensive? And it's not one of my strong suits.
No, go ahead and be offensive. It's fine.
Yeah. Billy Kemp's a nice player. You can only run so many plays with Billy Kemp. And we saw that in the very first game when Minnesota took him out of it completely because they just draped him. and Jeff Sims can't throw the ball into a very small window, and you'd run these pass plays where you're running a post pattern over the middle of the field with a 5'8" wide receiver, unless he's, Mike Wallace
Tyreek Hill,
Antonio Brown or whomever, you don't see that. Like that's, Tyreek Hill is an exception unto himself, but that's a really tough thing to do without elite speed. And I don't know that they ever were going to utilize Billy Kemp in a way that was going to take advantage of what he could do for them just because of how their passing game was. But still, when you go into the portal, I mean, part of the success of a Samori Toure is that he was a bigger guy. Like he wasn't super thick. He wasn't Quincy Enunwa level, jacked, but he could go out and get a football. He could high point. He could win in the air. You could throw it up to him. And Adrian would do that. And I think that Jamal Banks and to a maybe even bigger extent, Isaiah Nair, these two guys are going to be able to kind of help Nebraska in that regard. And maybe even more importantly than all of that, can give an example for Malachi Coleman, who needs someone to sort of model his college career off of. And there's nobody on the roster that really has that experience, that has his kind of body size. If you think that he's going to add some more weight to him in a full off season and under Corey Campbell and the strength and conditioning plan. So I like it for a variety of reasons. And I really think Dylan Raiola, we didn't get to see his peer recruiting because he committed to Nebraska so late. Mm-hmm. I think he is certainly in the mix in every one of, even someone like Stephon Thompson. I think having a guy like Dylan Raiola who's so confident and basically has all of this sort of clout without having ever played a snap, I think that helps Nebraska too. And I think he could use those receivers as much as anybody.
Schaefer, let's assume that they land Banks after they land Nair, and then we mentioned all the young guys in the room. How do you feel about that room if that's what we've got going into the fall?
Yeah, pretty good. I mean, the one thing you don't have is you don't have that one returning guy where you're like, okay, you had 35, 40 catches last year. You feel good about that, but you're going to put in two if they were to walk away with Banks. Where you like it? I mean, I have never missed an opportunity, and I won't here today, to sing the praises of what I think Jalen Lloyd can ultimately be in this offense and as a player in college football. And I think he's arrow up. They love Jaden Doss. They love Demetrius Bell and Malachi Coleman. We know all about his upside. And so I think being able to add a couple steady veterans, and somebody like Nair, who didn't get to play in 22 because he blew his knee out, but I think he blew his knee out. I can't remember exactly the injury, but he was set up to be one of Texas's top receivers. He was having a monster camp. They loved what he was doing. He got hurt, and we saw that play out. Like, they have great receiving talent. So he ended up getting buried in 2023. And so he's going to come back really, really hungry. I just think those guys are good assets, both in the locker room and then on the field for a relatively young offensive team. You look at the guys that could be out on the field for Nebraska outside of their offensive line without these transfer additions. They're pretty young. They don't have a lot of playing time out there. And so getting a couple steady veterans, I think, is always helpful.
Schaefer, you mentioned the veterans a couple of times now. And so my question to you is, what's next in terms of where a veteran needs to go? Is it in the quarterback room? Is that next on the priority list?
I don't know that there's anyone else that they're adding here at this period. I think we're probably talking more spring. Maybe they can find someone, kind of a deep cut college quarterback that's just looking for an opportunity, but we haven't really seen or heard a lot there. I almost wonder if they just want to get into the spring and see what that looks like. And then, you come out of the spring and you might have the quarterback pictures around the college football where guys are leaving and they need an opportunity somewhere else. And they might be more willing to come in and be a backup without necessarily having the chance to challenge in the spring. I don't know. I think it's difficult. If I was advising anyone that was going into the portal and they were looking at Nebraska and they were a quarterback, it'd be like, look, you're not going to win the job. I mean, there's no way you're winning that job. So if you're comfortable going there to be a backup quarterback, or if you're comfortable going there with the idea that an injury is how you're going to get onto the field in a significant way, and even then, like, it's just hard. I mean, you have.
Oh, Schaefer,
and then
there you go.
Did I disappear?
Yeah, just cut out there for a hot sec, but we got you again.
All right. And then, I was saying you have Raiola, most popular player on the team, hasn't taken a snap in college football. And then you have Heinrich Haarberg, who this coaching staff likes. Like, I know people want to bury and they want to throw him away and everything else. They like him. And he's liked in that locker room. And he's a native Nebraska kid. And I don't think he's going anywhere. And I think if he's their backup quarterback, I think Nebraska's going to be okay with that because he's played in games. And he won. He was the starting quarterback in all 5 of their wins this year. And so I just don't know that they view it the same way. If they tried to find someone, it seems like it'd be more so they could have a really competent battle between Haarberg and maybe you find a junior college guy that doesn't have a great opportunity at the FBS level, but he's willing to walk on and compete, that kind of thing. Like, I just think they have to be creative because I don't know that you're going to go into the portal and get what you want. And I don't know that they have the scholarship numbers to allow them to do that either.
Schaefer, do you find it the least bit risky to rely on just a true freshman or a couple of true freshmen in Haarberg to turn this offense around, or does it just all boil down to having the right person in the room?
I mean, it's not the least bit risky. It's a huge risk. I mean, it's basically going all in on a pair of 8s on the 4th hand of playing, in a tournament, right? Like, it's a good hand, but it's not necessarily assuring you of anything. And there's no safety net, right? So, I mean, it's a situation where I think this is just where they are. They wanted Dylan Raiola. They made the long-term decision to take him. They passed on the short term of Kyle McCord. There was no way they could get both from either quarterback. I don't think it would have worked for either one of them. And I think that makes sense the more you think about it. And this is just where they are. And so they, I don't think we're talking about a Nebraska team that's going to go rip off 10 wins. But if you're talking about a Nebraska team that can go 7-5 and handle some growing pains as Dylan Raiola progresses as a quarterback, then you've set yourself up really well. And you maybe sold out some short-term success for some long-term health of the program. But yeah, it's going to be risky. It's going to be nerve-wracking. Every time he takes a big hit and you're like, oh no, what's going to happen here? And we don't talk about this side of it enough. What if it just comes in against UTEP and it's not good and it takes a while because he's a true freshman like this, the top quarterbacks in the country for the 2023 class, not a lot of those guys played. Not a lot of them got opportunities. Arch Manning wasn't playing over multiple quarterbacks in Texas. So I think we have to allow for the idea that it may not work right away. It might be really ugly, but they're willing to invest in this. And I think we have to accept that that's where it's at.
Yeah, Schaefer, I'm not willing to accept that idea that it might be ugly, just for the record.
That's okay. Most people should not blindly accept premises that I say on here.
Schaefer, that's all we got for you today. I know there's a lot going on with Dana Holgerson and stuff too, but we are out of time. So hopefully by the time we talk to you next week, there's maybe some more movement in that direction as well. We appreciate your time as always, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, gentlemen, have a good one.
Thanks, Schaefer.
That's Mike J. Schaefer from Husker 24/7. All right, coming up next, we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk some Nebraska and Purdue basketball tonight. The Cornhuskers take on the number 1 team in the land, and we're going to talk to Mike Carmin of goldenblack.com about Purdue and the matchup against Nebraska here tonight. All that and a little bit more coming up on Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. Welcome back to Hurrdat Sports Radio here on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. We are brought to you by our friends at Pratt Dental. Pratt Dental is the first dentist in Nebraska. They're located in North Platte. They're the first dentist in Nebraska to be certified in the BioClear method and modern smile design, which can correct many aesthetic dilemmas in a permanent and less invasive manner than traditional treatments such as crowns. They have less time, less waiting, it's less invasive, and fewer appointments. You can get multiple restorations done in the same day with the BioClear method. Go check out Pratt Dental at prattdental.com. That's Pratt with 2 T's. prattdental.com/BioClear-dental-treatment, or give them a call at 221-2800. That's Pratt Dental, creating healthy smiles. Joining us now on the Warhorse Sportsbook hotline, he covers the Purdue Boilermakers for goldandblack.com. Mike Carmin, how are you?
Fine. How are you guys?
Good, Mike. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to assist you in any way I can.
So, Mike, did you make the trip to Lincoln to cover this game against Nebraska?
No, I'll leave that to the professionals.
Okay.
That's all right. The weather's not the most inviting this week anyway. But as this team has led up to this game, obviously they're coming off of a big win against top 10 Illinois. Obviously they've got that whole situation with Shannon going on, so that's a weird situation for the Illini right now in terms of the basketball part of it. But Purdue has been incredibly good to start the season off. They do have that one sort of outlier loss to Northwestern in overtime, but besides that, have been very good all year. How would you grade the Boilermakers so far, almost halfway through the season?
Well, I think they're a better team than what they were last year, and that's a high watermark to say that. Now, what that means in March, we don't know yet. But as of right now, I think they're a better team just because they're a year older. Their freshman guards are now sophomore guards, Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith. Some of their other players are just better. Trey Kaufman-Wren had a big game against Illinois. I apologize. My cat is sitting here squawking, wanting to say something. So they're better in a lot of areas. And then Lance Jones, the transfer from Southern Illinois, has given them an element they didn't have last year with the ability to give them more quickness on the perimeter, break a press. And he's an excellent three-point shooter. So they're still deep. They go 8-9 deep, depending on the night. They're still talented, and I haven't even mentioned Zach Edey. He has improved. His footwork is better. But he's still a consistent double-double. He's a guy that, for them to win big games, and he plays well in the big games. He's going to get 25 and 15 probably out of the gate. He's still a load to deal with. Teams are still trying to figure out how to deal with him and then deal with Purdue shooters on the perimeter. So I think they're better than they were last year. That's the reason they're number one right now. But again, long way to go in this thing. And then, the big question for Purdue is what happens in March when they get to the tournament.
Mike, I'm glad you brought that up because from your standpoint, was there any concern that there might be a hangover from what happened last March kind of heading into this season? I know there's a big gap in between that time frame there, but as you mentioned, there is some overlap in terms of the roster, especially you look at a guy like Zach Edey. How much, if at all, was it a concern that early round upset last year would have carried over and kind of caused an issue in this year's team?
I don't know if it was a concern. Once they knew who they were going to have on the team, and Zach put his name in the NBA draft, and that wasn't decided until late May. And then they had a foreign trip they went on. Zach didn't go on that trip because he was playing with Team Canada. But once they all got back together and realized the pieces that they would have, I think it was more motivation than anything else. And they have somebody that they can look at that went through the same thing, and that's Virginia a few years ago when they lost to a 16 seed and then came back and won the national championship. Not saying Purdue's going to do that, but that's an example for them to follow. And I think it has served them as motivation. And throughout the season, after they've won some games or beat teams they should have beat, they bring up the fact that this, whoever it is, Eastern Kentucky, Jacksonville, Morehead State, that's a team that they may face in the NCAA tournament in the first round, and they have to approach these non-conference games in that regard, knowing that they have to be on guard for an upset. So they've been pretty focused all year. I think it's more motivation than concern, and so far they have parlayed that into the start that they've had.
Mike, speaking of teams that are motivated based on how maybe an outcome last year impacts what the team looks like this year. Nebraska fell to Purdue in overtime at home last year, and they look already like a different team, a better team than they were last season as well. What do you make of Nebraska this season, and do you envision maybe another close one happening in Lincoln tonight?
Well, the one thing that has happened with Purdue and Nebraska and Lincoln is they have been close games, and it's the home crowd, it's the home environment, it's the opportunity to knock off a highly ranked team. And tonight it's the number one team in the country, so they're going to be ready. They have weapons out there. They can spread you out and hit some threes, take you off the dribble. Purdue basically plays the same way every game. They don't really alter what they do. They just do what they do very well. So you're not going to get a lot of trapping. You're not going to get a lot of those things. So, Purdue's defense has to be solid and challenge shooters. But Nebraska's going to have to deal with Zach. Zach doesn't really get into foul trouble a whole lot. He did in the last game against Illinois. He sat the last 8 minutes of the first half when he picked up 2 fouls. But Purdue outscored Illinois by 8 going into halftime. But yeah, this is kind of a very dangerous game for Purdue because it's on the road against an opponent that is eager to kind of make a statement in the Big Ten and help its NCAA chances as you get deeper into the season.
Mike, is there something that you've seen teams that are able to give Edey issues that they consistently do? Like, is there a common thread, or have there just not even been enough teams that have given Edey issues to really find a pattern there?
Well, they really don't give Zach issues. They have to make the decision whether they want to double Zach and then leave the perimeter open because he's a pretty good passer out of the post.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you play him one-on-one, which nobody has that kind of size in America, and defend the perimeter, and challenge the three-point shooters. It goes back and forth during the course of the game, depending how it's going. But there's not really one set formula how to deal with Zach Edey. Again, he had foul trouble the other night and only had a handful of points in the first half, and then he finishes with a double-double. If he doesn't get off to a good start, usually the second half, they're throwing it in there, and he's dominating. And so they've seen everything. Teams have tried just about everything. But it comes down for Purdue. If you're going to try to limit Zach, then they have to hit three-point shots, and that's kind of been the consistent theme of what teams have tried to do. They'll take their chances with Purdue shooting the three.
Mike, quickly here, got about 45 seconds. The loss against Northwestern, is that what they did well? Did they double Edey well, leave the three open, or was it just a situation of, hey, Purdue made shots because they did. They shot the ball very well, just Northwestern shot the ball insanely well?
So they lost because they had 17 turnovers, and Northwestern had 3. And Northwestern had Boo Buie, who lit them up. And that's the second straight year that's happened. So it really wasn't a surprise Purdue lost, maybe the way they lost. And the other bugaboo for Purdue is the turnovers. When they get a high number of turnovers, especially from the guards, then they're in trouble. And they've had trouble with bigger guards out on the perimeter and defending them, and then being defended by them. He's perfect. They've got some issues, but if they can take care of the ball, they're going to get more shots. They're going to have
That's Mike Carmin from goldandblack.com. Mike, we appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. That's Mike Carmin, goldblack.com, part of the On3 Network. All right, coming up next, we will wrap up the show with a little Hurrdat Hot Seat here on Hurrdat Sports Radio, AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. Wrap up the show here on a Tuesday on AM 590 ESPN Omaha, ESPN Tri-Cities, and KFOR in Lincoln. You're listening to Hurrdat Sports Radio. I'm Ravi Lulla. Andrew Rogers here with me. Shane Schillerberg producing. We are getting ready for some Hurrdat Hot Seat.
Yes, sir.
We've gotten into a lot of topics today. Want to take a minute to take a little step back, maybe look at things from a little different perspective, and grill each other a little on some questions that we have. Andrew, would you like to go first?
Yeah, let's start this thing off. So when I was watching the broadcast last night, I'm like, I'm a little PO'd that we haven't seen the NCAA football commercial yet, which
the EA Sports video game.
Sports video game.
Okay, sure, agreed.
Never came.
Yeah.
I think it was a big ploy to get people to watch that may not be overly interested in watching the football aspect, but love playing video games. But who knows? Maybe it was a combination of the two.
I think it was a big missed opportunity also.
I couldn't agree more.
Yep.
But at halftime, they cut to Fowler and Herbstreit.
Mm-hmm.
I was sitting there and I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if you could like pick the announcers for the game that you buy or at least are playing? So let's just say there was a pool of all college football announcers.
Sure, yeah.
So you have everything from the halftime or pregame, you have color and play-by-play, and you have a sideline reporter. Who is your ultimate broadcasting team?
Okay.
To call the game, let's just say it's Nebraska taking on Texas in the national championship game, and who do you want on the call for that game?
Well, I mean, obviously, if we've got radio guys in there, my guys Greg Sharp and Damon Benning on the call.
Unfortunately, they don't make their way to the video game.
Fair. So I just wanted to make sure I cleared that up first, that those are my first choices. I don't mind Fowler and Herbstreit. I think I might prefer Sean McDonough as a play-by-play guy a little bit.
But you don't have to choose Sean McDonough's partner either. You can choose any color guy.
I think I would maybe do McDonough and Herbstreit. I know not everybody loves Herbie. I think he's pretty good. He doesn't actively annoy me the way, and honestly, that's all I'm looking for out of a broadcast is don't annoy me. If you can add something to the broadcast, that's terrific. My last pick is Matt Millen. I don't know. Just last pick overall. Matt.
I didn't ask that question, but thanks for adding it.
Just wanted to make sure I gave context there. Very last pick.
And then who's your sideline reporter?
Ooh, I'll be honest. I don't pay that much attention to sideline reporters.
So at least for the national championship game, it was Molly McGrath and Holly Rowe.
So Molly's good. Holly Rowe was the one that came to mind. I'd probably go Holly Rowe. Either one of them last night I thought was very good. I don't usually that's where I'm like checking Twitter is when they're doing the sideline reports and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am not always locked in on what's happening when they're because you never get good answers out of the coaches in those situations. But I'll go Holly Rowe. She's
Kayla from ESPN is pretty good.
Who?
Kayla. I don't have her last name. She was
Laura Rutledge is pretty good too.
Oh yeah. She is good.
And then your pregame, postgame, and halftime show, you get two. So kind of like how, like if you're playing NBA, you have Ernie Johnson and Shaq, and, everybody. Who would you have like two? You get two people to be your pregame, your halftime, and your postgame show.
Ooh, that's tricky. I'll be honest, I don't watch a ton of those.
Caleb Burton, by the way.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Shane.
Yeah.
I don't watch a ton of the pregame shows.
Because you can have anybody from Fox. You could have anybody from Game Day.
I actually think Urban Meyer does a really good job.
So Urban's going to your table, huh?
I think so. Like, I don't love him as a person, and I certainly would never hire him as a football coach, but I think he's actually really good on TV. And so I think I probably go Urban there. I don't know as far as kind of my main anchor guy, since I didn't use him for I'm gonna go with our guy Matt Schick. Can I have Matt Schick?
I'll give you Matt Schick. That's fine.
I want Matt Schick as my host, and then give me Urban Meyer as my analyst.
Yep. So big noon kickoff. Rob Stone would have been like
Rob's good.
He's kind of like the director.
Yeah, he's like the host. Like he's the Ernie
true
Johnson
host.
Yeah, he's the Ernie Johnson.
And then so you took Urban Meyer. Okay, so that's a good crew. So here's who
who did you get?
So I'm with you on color. I would go Herbstreit, and I think that is a little skewed / swayed because he's a part of all the big games.
Yeah,
and I've just gotten used to listening to his
feels like
voice,
a big game,
right? I just got used to listening to his voice. I want to go away from Fowler. I love Chris Fowler.
Yeah, I think he does a good job.
Again, I've gotten used to his voice for the big game, and I don't want to just go into the pool of what is always done.
He's also very good at hosting the pre and post game shows.
Yeah, he could be a very
good
good
one. I almost went Fowler as my other guy.
So my play-by-play would be Gus Johnson.
See,
I'm a Gus Johnson guy.
I like the emotion and the passion, and he's better on college football than he is college basketball.
I don't mind him on basketball.
So here's my
but I really enjoy his college football calls.
Here's my problem on college basketball is he does not always seem as prepared as I would like him to be. I think he leans into his emotion and his passion a little more.
And I'm cool with that. For when I'm winning a national title, I need some passion, baby.
He's better in highlights than he is to listen to for a whole game.
Okay.
That's what I would say about Gus.
So I'm going to go with Gus. I'm going to go with Herb Street. I would have gone with my real guy, Kevin Harlan, if he would call some college games, but he's strictly NFL.
Yeah, he does
NBA.
college basketball.
Yeah, he does
but
college
doesn't
basketball.
Really do college
doesn't
football.
really dip into college football. My sideline reporter would be Molly McGrath.
Okay.
It was either between her or Laura Rutledge. Very close second there.
Very good choices.
Then my pregame would be Reese Davis.
Oh, Reese is good. I like Reese.
He's college game day. And then I'm taking somebody else from the college game day desk.
Okay.
And you need this guy.
I think I know where you're going.
You need Pat McAfee.
I knew you were going.
You need some excitement there. You need me to. I would watch the automated pregame, halftime, and postgame just to hear at least one time Reese Davis and Pat McAfee go back and forth.
So I will say one of the funnier. I think this was the SEC championship. One of the funnier college game day moments that I've ever seen was Pat McAfee doing the entire Georgia song as he's doing his pick, and then he picks Alabama to win the game, and people lost their minds. It was incredibly well played. I actually like Pat McAfee better in that setting than I do for his actual own show. I think he's maybe better as a little bit of a part of the ensemble there. But that's just my personal preference. I don't hate that choice. I think he brings a little bit of flavor, a little bit of color there. I do think he's better off if you've got 3 or 4 guys in that scenario.
Maybe so. I just think he's so.
That's why it works for me on game day.
Yeah, and he's so knowledgeable in a lot of aspects of this industry.
Sure.
Because he does it on the daily. He played in the NFL. He played college football. He's got a lot of stories. He knows a lot of people. That's why Pat McAfee, and pair that with his charisma. It's a perfect fit for the game I want to play.
The Georgia, the trolling Georgia by itself, he deserves inclusion because that legitimately was hilarious. All right, so here's my question. We've got a few minutes here. We're probably only going to get to these 2 today, so we'll keep it college football as we RIP put the 2023 season to rest. Pour one out for our homie, and we put the 4-team playoff to rest as well. My question for you.
I know some people aren't.
No, I'm
give me more football.
Give me more of this. I wanted a 16. I'll take a 12. 8 probably makes the most sense, but whatever. I'm fine.
Find a good middle ground.
Yeah, it's all good. All right. So here's my question. We've talked a lot about the cloud over Michigan season with the scandals and everything like that.
It's dark.
Imagine your favorite team, regardless of sport, regardless of professional pro. All right.
My head.
How large of a scandal would it take to, in your mind, as a fan, taint the championship that you just won?
How large would it have to be? I would choose the Cardinals.
Sure. Okay.
And I would choose something similar to the Black Sox scandal.
Oh, like a gambling, fixing games.
Yep, fixing games.
So let's say after the season,
okay,
you win the title, everything, no one gets suspended or anything like that. Let's say after the season, half the team gets suspended for steroids. Is that big enough?
You know what's funny about that? I'm okay with steroids.
Yeah, I don't care about steroids at all.
So for me, I'm cool with it. But for what the rule of the game is today, that's a big issue.
That's a pretty big one.
But
it wouldn't ruin it for you.
No, because again, that's my team, that's my fandom, and so it's what I gave credit to Michigan fans in the first segment too about that, saying look, you don't have to be mad about winning because you can take that home with you, and just like Anthony Broome said, there'll be people buying national championship T-shirts they won in their eyes, but it doesn't take away the fact that the national scope would also be no,
you have to
because
take it
it's
into
like the
consideration.
Astros, right? The Astros banged on trash cans and stole signs and pitches, and boom, they won a World Series because of it. If it was something with steroids, though, you still have to hit the ball.
Yeah.
So, like, if you're hitting, like, 40 home runs in the ALCS, then maybe we should revisit something.
Maybe we have a little conversation. No, I agree with you on the steroids. People know this about me. I don't care about steroids at all. I think they're terrific. I think they should be legalized. Just go ahead and, for baseball, just juice them up.
Yeah, but also, too, whoever is feeding them the steroids, whoever the team doctor is, you can go.
Man,
we don't need you.
I said this. So, the Red Sox obviously won in 2004. And it was
steroids. It was steroids.
Yeah.
They should have been stripped from 2004, and the team that was the runner-up that year should have won.
Hard pass. But no, David Ortiz came out on the Mitchell report list or whatever, and people were like, oh, does it taint? I was like, I would have injected steroids into the guy myself if I knew it was going to get me a title. I do not care. Give me the needle. I will pop that thing in. I don't care at all.
Yeah.
But you're right. If it was a gambling, a game-fixing scandal, that's really tough to get past. That's right at Hot Seat for the day.
Mm-hmm.
We will hopefully
maybe we'll show for the day.
Maybe we'll get to some more questions on Thursday. Get another edition of Hurrdat Hot Seat. Great show for you today. We will be back with more tomorrow on Hurrdat Sports Radio.